Beneath the grey waters of the North Atlantic, in the claustrophobic darkness of a U-boot, Kriegsmarine commanders observed through their periscopes not only their prey, but also the ingenuity of their enemy. These German sea wolves, trained in Kiel and Wilhelmshaven, were not simply blind hunters. They were involuntary military analysts forced to understand, respect, and ultimately fear the tactics that the Allies perfected month after month. This is the story of the Battle of the Atlantic, told from the other side of the periscope. Between 1940 and early 1941, German commanders lived through what they called Die glückliche Zeit, the happy time. Kapitänleutnant Otto Kretschmer, the most successful ace of submarine warfare with 44 ships sunk, wrote in his memoirs that early Allied convoys were like flocks without a shepherd. Merchant vessels sailed in predictable formations, with insufficient escorts and no real coordination. Günther Prien, the hero of Scapa Flow, described in his reports how he could infiltrate the middle of ship columns, fire torpedoes at will, and submerge without facing an organized response. But these same commanders, writing from prisoner camps years later, admitted something crucial. The Allies learned fast. Wolfgang Luth, the third most successful commander, noted in his war diary, "The enemy is not stupid. Each month they make us pay more dearly for every torpedo fired." 1942 marked the turning point. German commanders began reporting alarming changes in Allied tactics. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the U-boat fleet, received increasingly worrying reports. His commanders described how Allied convoys had transformed their structure. Reinhard Hardigan, who operated in Operation Paukenschlag off the American coast, wrote, "The British had perfected a system that converted their numerical weakness into tactical strength. They concentrated their escorts where it mattered most, around the merchant ships." German commanders identified several elements that made the convoy system formidable. First, the concentration of forces. As Erich Topp wrote, "We could no longer find isolated ships. They forced us to attack where the defense was strongest." Second, formation discipline. Coordinated zigzagging, smoke screens, and synchronized course changes complicated firing calculations. A torpedo required up to 3 minutes of travel to reach the target. In that time, a well-directed convoy could completely invalidate the firing solution. Third, and this they admitted with professional respect, the courage of the escorts. Peter Kremer wrote, "British corvettes did not retreat. With hulls that could barely protect them from our torpedoes, they threw themselves directly against us. But it was the evolution of anti-submarine tactics that truly changed the game, and what spilled the most ink from German commanders in their memoirs." Herbert Werner, who survived the war after multiple patrols, dedicated entire chapters to describing the technological hell that the Allies deployed. Radar. German commanders were slow to understand that the Allies could detect them on the surface during the night. Werner describes the initial confusion. "They attacked us in complete darkness, as if they could see us." Many believed the British had developed supernatural night vision. When they finally understood the existence of centimetric radar, respect mixed with fear. Adalbert Schnee wrote, "They took away the night. Our best ally was stolen from us by metal boxes on enemy masts. Sonar and ASDIC. Regarding underwater detection systems, opinions were mixed. Experienced commanders like Otto Kretschmer noted their limitations. ASDIC lost contact at short range. A skilled commander could use this. However, Werner warned in his memoirs, the technology constantly improved. What worked in 1942 was suicidal in 1943. Depth charges. Here, the testimony becomes visceral. Horst Bredow describes, "The sound of a nearby depth charge cannot be compared to anything. The hull creaks, lights explode, men bleed from their ears. and then you wait for the next one, and the next. German commanders recognized that the Allies perfected scientific launch patterns. Heinrich Lehmann-Willenbrock noted, "They no longer dropped charges randomly. They used calculated patterns that covered entire zones of water. Escaping required luck as well as skill." Aviation. But nothing, absolutely nothing in U-boot memoirs is mentioned with more fearful respect than Allied aviation. Teddy Suren wrote, "A patrol aircraft turned the ocean into a trap. We couldn't dive fast enough. We couldn't run far enough. The development of the Lee Light airborne searchlights was described by several commanders as the final blow to our night operations. Aircraft could detect them with radar and then illuminate them at the last moment before attack." The most surprising thing about reading these memoirs is not the fear or frustration, but the genuine professional respect. Reinhard Hardigan wrote about British escort commanders. They were exceptional sailors. They knew our tactics because they too were men of the sea. Wolfgang Luth dedicated pages to analyzing the evolution of support group tactics, specialized escort groups that hunted U-boats proactively. They didn't wait for us to attack. They came looking for us. It was a psychologically devastating role reversal. About Captain Frederick John Walker, the British ace of submarine hunters, several German commanders wrote with almost reverent admiration. Otto Kretschmer, captured in 1941, commented after the war, "Walker understood how we thought. He was dangerous because he was one of us, but on the other side." One aspect that tormented German commanders was the apparent Allied prescience about U-boat positions. Peter Kremer wrote, "Convoys diverted their route exactly where we had formed our patrol lines. Coincidence? After the 10th time, it stopped seeming like it. They didn't know then about Ultra and the breaking of Enigma, but they suspected." Adalbert Schnee noted in 1943, "Either they have impossible luck or they're reading our mail." Herbert Werner was more direct in his post-war memoirs. "We were defeated by technology, but also by intelligence. We fought against an enemy who knew our plans before some of our own commanders did." By 1943, the tone of war diaries changed dramatically. Eric Topp wrote, "We no longer hunted. We had become the prey." May 1943 was the decisive month. Dönitz lost 43 U-boats. Surviving commanders described a hell. Convoys surrounded by aggressive escorts, constant air cover, coordinated attacks that gave no respite. Heinrich Lehmann-Willenbrock described his last patrol. "We spent more time submerged and fleeing than attacking. The ocean was no longer our domain. We were intruders tolerated until we were detected." In their post-war memoirs, many commanders were brutally honest about German deficiencies. Werner criticized the stubbornness of high command. "Dönitz ordered us to attack convoys that we knew were hyper-defended. Bravery without tactical intelligence is simply a waste of lives." Peter Kremer pointed out, "While the Allies shared information instantly between ships and aircraft, we depended on radios that gave us away every time we transmitted." Reinhard Hardigan was more philosophical. "We fought against industrial economies that outnumbered us 50-1. We couldn't win a war of attrition. We needed absolute tactical superiority, and the Allies didn't allow us to maintain it." When asked after the war which Allied tactic was most effective, the answers were revealing. Otto Kretschmer, "The convoy system. It forced us to attack on the worst possible terms." Wolfgang Luth, "The integration of aviation. It took away our freedom of movement." Herbert Werner, "The entire system. It wasn't one tactic, it was a comprehensive approach that combined technology, intelligence, and courage." Teddy Suren summed it up best. "They defeated us because they learned faster than we could adapt, and because they had the resources to implement what they learned. In the end, The memoirs of U-boot commanders reveal an uncomfortable truth for them. The Allies won the Battle of the Atlantic not by luck nor by numerical superiority alone, but through tactical excellence, constant innovation, and the will to learn from each loss. German commanders, even in defeat, recognized that they faced an enemy who had transformed their initial weaknesses into a naval warfare system that defined the standard for the rest of the century. Eric Topp wrote in 1946 from a prisoner camp, "We were good. They were better. It's that simple. It's that painful. History is written by the victors, the saying goes. But sometimes the defeated write the most honest testimonies. And in the worn pages of war diaries, in memoirs written in prison cells, in the confessions of old German sea wolves, we find perhaps the greatest tribute to Allied naval tactics, the respect of those who faced them and lost."